Hi everyone. On behalf of the course team, I welcome you to the third lecture for this week. I remain Chuks Enwerem, your facilitator. In the second lecture for the week, you were taken through news reporting. News reporting, as you have learned, is the art of discovering all relevant facts, selecting and presenting the important ones, and weaving a comprehensive story for the consumption of the audience. However, in this lecture, you will be taken through what makes news, exploring the criteria, and then the news commercial. In this seemingly confusing life situation where there are shapeless jumble of events and people jostle among each other endlessly, the responsibility is on journalists, also known as news carriers, to help make sense of the whole affair. Consequently, every day these news hounds try to put structure into the chaos to enable the public receive it in a sorted out and neatly packaged form called news stories. This may come to the people the same day on radio, television, or online, and in the case of newspapers, the next day. In the effort to extract from the gamut of information, the journalist makes some decisions and judgments in order to select those stories deemed to be important. The journalist considers the newsworthiness of each event and decides which one fits. Again, the journalist decides how to present the information, and this comes out sometimes as framing, usually reflecting the experience and orientation of the individual journalist. This process of deciding what to include in the news and how to present it is a very important aspect of newsmaking, and it requires that the practitioner should understand and critically evaluate them. In this lecture, we will discuss the major criteria for newsworthiness and principles that guide news judgment. Now, let us go through the objective of this lecture. At the end of the lecture, you should be able to describe the criteria used in assessing the news value or newsworthiness of any event, person, or idea, and critically discuss the basic principles in making news judgments or in shaping the news. Now, what are the criteria in assessing news values and newsworthiness? The following criteria are considered in assessing news values and newsworthiness. 1. Textual analysis. You should endeavor to critically examine the newsworthiness of front page stories of any known major or national newspaper or its online edition, such as The Guardian, The Sun, The Punch, Daily Trust, among others, based on the following outlined factors. 1. Timeliness. 2. Impact and importance. 3. Prominence, proximity, conflict, unusualness or human interest, currency, necessity, among others. Now, timeliness. News is so called for a reason, because it is news or new information. The more recent the information you are passing, the more likely people will find it of interest. As a factor of newsworthiness, timeliness refers to a story's relevance with regard to the speed with which it hits the airwaves for electronic media or newspaper for print media. The digital age of internet immediacy has made timeliness even more significant, given that news now goes viral in seconds after its breaking. If an information is not passed soon after it's occurred, any time after that, it is considered just what it is, information, and no longer news. As a media literate person, you need to understand this difference between news and information. 2. Impact and importance. A journalist putting out a news item will always ask, how will this affect my readers' lives? Now, the impact of the story quickly establishes the importance of the piece to the reader and the consequences for the reader. In a fire engine story, for example, the impact of this story was that anyone listening to the radio, unlucky enough to suffer a fire, will hopefully suffer less damage because of these amazing new fire engines. It also lets people know that they should keep an eye out for some shiny new fire engines driving around town. This value works hand in hand with proximity, as impact is largely determined by audience. Prominence. The value of news is determined by, among other things, the prominence of the newsmaker or source. For example, a call from Femi Adesina, the presidential spokesperson, to any newsroom about the nationality controversy of Atiku Abubakar would certainly merit an important space in the newspaper or television bulletin. As the presidential spokesperson, everything he does, or almost anything he does or says, is newsworthy because he occupies a prominent position in the political space in Nigeria. The same applies to other important personalities in industry, in commerce, military, and the private sector. Many news media organizations look out for important persons with high level of prominence to put their imprimatur to any breaking news. This is also referred to as authority. Journalists like to quote these authorities in order to authenticate their stories and make the information believable. The managing director, CEO, XYZ Bank PLC has said that would command more respect from a news medium than, quote, the assistant manager of ABC Staff Cooperative has advised this, unquote. The more the news source or authority is seen to be of prominence, the more the story is placed in a strategic position in the newspaper, early segment of telecast, and so on. Even as a citizen journalist, before you hit the button send, you will ask yourself, is the source of this news prominent enough to command the space being given to it? It is not everyone that comments on an issue that merits to be given media space. Proximity. Proximity is about understanding and considering the impact of the story as it relates to the audience of that same story. It is normal for a journalist to ask, quote, does this story matter to my audience? Unquote. For instance, if a local journalist in Imo State receives a news item about herdsmen attacking a village in Benue State or Adamawa, he may not take it as seriously as the Benue-based journalist. The reason is that the event is closer to the Benue journalist than the Imo State journalist. Both of them will ask the same question, does this story matter to my audience? While the Imo journalist will hesitate, Benue journalist will certainly answer yes. Proximity is not only in physical terms, it can also be psychological. If the Super Eagles of Nigeria, for instance, were playing in faraway France, Nigerian journalists at home will follow the story to France and bring the news back home because, quote, the story matters to their audience, unquote. The closer the event is to the audience, either physically or psychologically, the more likely the news is of value to the journalist. This in part explains why media houses do not need to fill their newspaper pages with foreign stories that have little or no impact or relevance to their local audience. Number 5, conflict. When journalists have a piece of information they want to run or turn into news, they will be considering what are the different sides of this issue and what are the arguments. They will be thinking about the way political news is reported, just like the way sports is covered. The scenario is like this. Two teams fight it out. It never seems like they can agree on anything they are fighting for. The moment they seem to agree on it, it begins to get boring. It is the conflict aspect of life that sustains the interest of media audience and the reason journalists look out for it and play it up. Even though Nigerians may jeer and shout at politicians for fighting dirty, in quotes, almost all the time they certainly would not feel excited anymore if the conflict is totally resolved. Neither would journalists have much to report after that. Simply put, humans love conflict, especially simple, two-sided type of it. Okay. Matt Zajowski says, quote, it has the power to engage us emotionally as we get to judge the merits of the arguments, judge those who are wrong, and get our righteous agreement jollies by nodding vigorously along with those we agree with. And that's the essence of conflict in journalism. Number 6, human interest. A human interest story is a feature story that presents the affected person or people in an emotional way. It has the unique feature of presenting people and their problems, concerns, or achievements in a way that brings about interest, sympathy, or motivation in the reader or the viewer. As a type of soft news, human interest stories are different from hard news because they tend to connect the audience with the persons involved in an emotional or psychological way. A lot of people can relate to human interest stories because, quote, people want to read stories about other people, so a human interest angle can be easily, especially useful in helping you put a human face on a bigger story that needs to be personalized. This is according to Chuks. Now, as a media literate person hoping to engage in citizen journalism, human interest stories is a good way to start as the audience gets connected to your subject, and this makes the news interest sustainable for a long time. Currency. The story is said to be enjoying currency if it is trending. Currency can be said to mean that an idea's time has come or an issue of current interest. It means more value is held with the trending news stories that are relevant to public concern rather than topics that few people care about. At some seasons of the year, everybody is inundated with either end of year lists or New Year's resolution stories. Then soon after, attention shifts to stories about romance, chocolate, and so on and so forth. The smell of Valentine is on the air. Newspapers do the coverage of Valentine's Day. The overall interest in these periods is enhanced and sustained because of the trend of the moment. In some quarters, some other elements are added: necessity, oddity, the bizarre, etc., indicating that news values to an extent may be contextual. Though seemingly inexhaustive, they are a great tool for anyone, conventional or citizen journalist, who may need to decide what and when to publish, as well as someone needs to explain to another person why and how this is done. Now, what are the basic principles of making news judgment or shaping the news? Making judgment about news is not as easy as it sounds, but a conscientious journalist would apply the following principles to make decisions and judgments at appropriate time. 1. Truthfulness. His or her consideration should be in ensuring accuracy, that is, getting the facts right, as well as being coherent, that means making sense of the facts in the presentation. Number 2. Dedication to the public interest. Responsible journalists must strive to be good at their job and to win the trust of the public. They must hold governments and other institutions to account, and they must act and behave ethically in public interest. You must note, however, that because the public is interested in something has nothing to do with whether it is in the public interest. 3. Informing, not manipulating the audience. Media manipulation is a technique in journalism in which partisans create an image or argument that favors their particular interests. It is similar to propaganda, which is a one-sided communication that projects the good only and not the bad. A journalist's role at all times is to provide valid information, that is news, to the public or audience to enable them make informed decisions in any given situation. The information should be factual and not seen to favor any particular interest. When a journalist presents information in a way to create an image that presents a particular party's interest in a good light, Then the journalist is said to be manipulative, as such technique robs the audience of their right to objective evaluation and decision. Comprehensiveness stroke completeness. Chapter 9 of the Elements of Journalism compares comprehensiveness of journalism to cartography this way. Quote, it creates a map for citizens to navigate society. This is its utility and its economic reason for being. Unquote. Comprehensiveness and proportion is about taking stories out of proportion. For instance, the death of a celebrity or a politician, while ignoring the rest of the news around the community. This practice is considered disproportional. It is comprehensive when coverage is made inclusive of all possible corners. In fact, journalism's value depends on its completeness and proportionality. Journalists who devote far more time and space to a sensational trial of celebrity scandal than they know it deserves because they think it will sell do no justice to their core. Comprehensiveness means concern for proportionality, key way of demonstrating public interest motives. 5. Diversity. That means inclusion of news of all communities, not just targeted communities. The American Press Institute gives us a clear idea of what inclusiveness entails when it writes, quote, the primary goal we seek, and which we encourage others also to pursue, is a public information ecosystem consisting of journalism products and the public's own conversations that fairly represents, include, and aids varied groups of viewpoints in a community. Unquote. In Nigeria, the news media are encouraged to transcend the urban areas and include in their coverage the hinterlands. Similarly, some vulnerable groups such as physically challenged and those without adequate representation in the society need to be included in media reports. By so doing, many people will feel a sense of belonging and not feel neglected in the scheme of things. Unfortunately, a casual look at our newspapers' front pages and newscasts on television would reveal that the news is heavily skewed in favor of the elite and what they do as well as where they live. When the lower rung of the society is mentioned, it is often cast them in bad light or just to amuse the elite. In this lecture, we have discussed the criteria journalists use in deciding what news to select from among competing alternatives. We examine timeliness, impact, prominence, proximity, and conflict. Others considered are human interest and currency. We also analyze the principles considered in making news judgment, which include truthfulness, dedication to the public interest, informing rather than manipulating the audience, as well as diversity or inclusiveness. We have come to the end of this lecture on what makes news, exploring the criteria. In the fourth lecture, which is going to be the concluding lecture for this week, we shall examine public service announcements and other public information. See you soon.